Hello everybody, thank you for tuning in for this episode of A&S Academy. The goal of today's episode is to provide you, equip you with some information so that way you can go and better judge woven belts, whether they are paracord or whether they are macrame. To the intro, let me grab my paper here. My name is Godric Grai. I am a player out of the Kingdom of the Rising Winds. Why should you be listening to me about this stuff? I have won 2 Kingdom level Dragon Masters, mainly on the back of woven belts and some other stuff, but I have scored best in show a couple of times with belts, and so that's a little bit of my qualifications. I've been making belts for probably 7 years now, 6 years now. Got into it a little bit back and I've loved it ever since. So that's a little bit of my background and why you should listen to my opinion when it comes to these belts. So general topics, what makes a woven belt good? I think the first thing that we can talk about is the tension of the belt. If you take a look at a belt and you can stick your finger through it, the weave is not tight enough, that in general is not going to be a good belt. So you want to make sure that the belt itself is very tight and very even all the way down the belt. Other things that make belts score really well, fancy rings. You can also do fancy end knots and different weaves. There are a few basic weaves, and if someone were to branch from that, they should score higher, rather than just doing the basic weaves all the time. So I have a few items here we're going to go through. I've got some belts that I've entered in Kingdom level or have entered in Park level, one of them. Most of them have been entered in Kingdom level, so I'll tell you the scores that they got, what you as a judge should be looking for, and why these belts scored what they did. So we're going to start off on the low end of the spectrum. Start off with one of the first belts I ever made. This, in a Kingdom level tournament, should score on a 5-point scale, which all of these we're going to go through on a 5-point scale. This belt would score about a 2. So we'll go in a little bit in depth on why this should score 2. One, you can see the ring is very, very flimsy. It is not a very good belt ring. It's a large ring, but it isn't a real thick. This isn't going to hold your belt up. Negative points for that. The weave itself isn't too bad. It's a basic weave. They've got some color variation on there, which is nice. But the downside is I don't know if you can see that, stick your finger right through the weave. So the weave itself is not very tight, even though it is somewhat aesthetically pleasing, but not too great. We come down to the very end. Another main reason why this scored a 2. If you look at the end knot, it is very basic, just tied off, very flimsy, not very impressive. The ends are finished, which is bonus. Always, always, always rate down on people if they just leave their ends frayed. But as a whole, this tie-off is not very impressive. So all of those things combined are why this should grade a 2.0 out of 5.0 on a Kingdom level tournament. The next one, I have entered this in a Kingdom level tournament, and it scored about a 2.8 to a 3. I can't remember exactly. It's been a little bit. So it's your basic horizontal weave, right? This one is macrame. It does have a normal ring on it. So you can see it's a basic ring. This is an average ring. Anything less than this, downgrade. Anything higher than this, upgrade. Basic weave. This one is a tighter weave. It's not super duper tight, but it's pretty dang close. I can't fit my finger through it. I can't pull the weave apart. So that is average. This is a 3.0 on a Kingdom level scale. Then we get down to the end knot, and you can see it's the helix. So it is better than the normal knot. This one is actually a triple helix, which is pretty good. That one, if you see a triple, those are pretty hard to do. So this one is a little below average, right at average. This next one here scored, if I remember correctly, a 3.7 or a 3.8 at a Kingdom level tournament. We'll unweave it here. So again, to start, average ring. Now, the weave on this one You can see it is pretty tight. I can't fit my finger through it. It is woven pretty tight. If you look down horizontally at it, it is pretty consistent all the way through. Now, and it does use a weave that is a more complex weave. This is called the puzzle piece weave. You can see it a little bit better there. Something like this is above your average weave, so you should score higher for this than you should the basic weaves. And then the reason this one scored a little bit higher too, the end knot is a little different, just a spiral, but then it's got these braids at the end. So did something different with the tassel. Creativity on this one scored pretty high, but it is, so this one is a high 3, maybe a low 4 on a kingdom level. It got downgraded a little bit because, I don't know if you can see that on this side, it's a little bit, it's not as smooth as you would want it to be going into the knot. Part of that is because the belt is so wide. So when you're judging wide belts, make sure that they have the same consistency all the way through, including into the end knot there. Now, this next one scored, if I remember correctly, a 4.2 on a kingdom scale. We'll start with basic ring, so average there. The weave itself is a different weave. A lot of people don't know this one. It's a vertical weave, but it also is a hybrid belt. You can see it's got paracord in the middle with macrame on the edges. It is a 4-belter Knights belt. So the fact that it has two different styles, it's macrame and paracord, is why it's scored up. The weave is pretty consistent all the way through. And then we get down to the end, and this is what scored it pretty high. Fix these. So it's got 2 end knots on the end. It's got 2 of the DNA strands of the different colors. They're grouped sword and serpent for the competitive belts and flame and crown for the service belts. And so this scored pretty highly because of these end knots. Snake bite end knots is what I call them, where you have 2 separate ones with the weaves. So that one, as a reminder, scored low 4s to mid 4s at a kingdom level tournament. Now this one here won best in show at a kingdom level tournament. It scored a 4.9, 4.85, I think, something like that. This belt is unique and is different from almost any other belt that the judges had ever seen. So it starts off as 2 separate belts. It then merges into one belt that goes from hip to hip, and then it splits back off into 2 belts for where you can tie it on. Right, so the point of this belt is to be able to show 2 things. So this one shows Fighting Company colors and Squire. So it also scored high. If you can see these rings, they're D rings. They are fairly expensive D rings as well. So that was bonus points. If you look at the weave itself, this one is paracord. There's no way you're able to pull that apart. It is a very, very tight weave all the way through. And then even when you get down to this part, it's a little bit looser, but still pretty tight. And then it comes back and it splits off into, pull these out, the 2 separate belts that come in to the lobster tail end knots, which scored pretty well. Like I said, this was a 4.9 on a kingdom level. Where'd my paper go? So what do judges miss the most? So the things that judges miss the most is if they don't have an end knot, that is a pretty big deal because the weave will come undone. At the end of the end knot, I don't know if you can see this here, it's knotted. If they don't have that knotted or somehow tied off, this is going to slide down your tassels as well, right? So you need an end knot to keep your weave in place, and then you need a knot at the end of the end knot to make sure that this stays in place. If they don't have those, the longevity of the belt is going to slide down, and then the weave itself will become much, much looser. So anything that doesn't have those things is a below average score. They need to make sure that they have some sort of capping to make sure that the weave stays how you want it to. Another thing that most judges miss on these with the paracord, I have gone in and I have gutted the last 2 inches, and then I have melted, and I have pinched together with pliers the ends. If the belt doesn't have melted ends, they will fray and it will look terrible long term. So make sure that they have those on there. If they don't have those, that is a below average score. Things that most judges miss as well are the different weave types. There are pretty much 2 or 3 major weave types, and then everything else is a variation from those. So recognizing how difficult a weave is for judging is pretty important. And if you don't know about that, you can go ask someone who does belt weaves, and pretty quickly you can, like if you bring me a weave and I'll look at it, and if I can figure out how to do it in 2 minutes, it's probably a pretty common weave. That doesn't mean you score it bad, but it means it's a common weave and you have to take that into consideration. So like this is a very, very simple weave. So there's the normal horizontal weave, but when you throw it into the combo with this, it becomes a 4.9, right? So even though this is a basic weave, if you're doing fancy stuff with it, it can score pretty high. How do you cheat with these? So what to look for to tell if someone is cheating. These are very difficult to cheat on. Most of the time, these belts you can't order online. You can order some paracord survival belts with real belt buckles, like for what you're supposed to wear in mundane world. But other than that, it's pretty hard to cheat with this stuff. The only way you can really tell is if I went and I bought one off Etsy and I turned it in as my own. So as a judge for that, if you notice this, it looks like someone else's work. I can tell that I know when I look out on my Kingdom field who has made the woven belts on my Kingdom field, because there's only half a dozen of us that make them in my Kingdom, and I can tell just by looking who the specific styles of who made them, right? So if the judges who have seen my stuff for years now, if I turn in something that is completely off of my normal style, then they know I probably bought it. Or I have to describe it in my write-up pretty well why I'm differing from my normal style. But it's pretty hard to cheat. You don't really have to worry about cheating too much with these. Closing here, I hope this was helpful. If you enjoyed this, please like the channel, the YouTube channel. You can find me. My name is Nate Frederick. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. You can find all my belts on a page called Dragon Master.